This is the Mop Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. The House of Representatives is expected to vote on the 2026 budget as early as today. This after the Senate version of the budget bill passed Tuesday, 51-50, with Vice President J.D. Vance being forced to break the tie. This bill cuts Medicaid by 20%. This bill cuts food stamps by 15%, making it the largest cut to America's social safety net in American history. And now it faces objections in the Republican-controlled House of Representatives by fiscal conservatives who insist these cuts aren't deep enough, not cruel enough. At the same time, not one of these Republicans criticizes the $4.5 trillion tax cut for the richest 1% that will add at least $3.5 trillion to our national debt. Only 3 Senate Republicans voted against it on Tuesday. Susan Collins of Maine stepped up and voted no. Thom Tillis of North Carolina voted no just hours before he announced his retirement from politics. And Rand Paul, Senate Republican from Kentucky, who he voted no and now says he doesn't see how this bill passes in the House. He told reporters the Senate took the original House version of the bill and added way more debt. Rand Paul added any Republicans who call themselves fiscal conservatives couldn't possibly vote for it. Again, nothing about the millions thrown off Medicaid, millions thrown off Obamacare, millions thrown off food stamps. It's the debt Rand Paul is worried about. Well, assuming every single House Democrat shows up to vote, Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, can only afford 3 Republican defectors. Vice presidents do not break ties in the House of Representatives. So if it's a tie, like it was in the Senate on Tuesday, then this bill goes down to defeat. In order for the Senate version of the bill to make it to the floor of the House for a vote this week, this bill must first pass through the House Rules Committee. South Carolina House Republican Ralph Norman sits on that Rules Committee, and he called the bill passed by the Senate on Tuesday, quote, a non-starter. He said it's time to go back to the drawing board. But people say a lot of things. For example, back in 2021, after January 6, and just hours before Joe Biden was about to be sworn into office, Ralph Norman sent a text message to then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, urging Trump to declare martial law. Even worse, Norman misspelled the word marshal. So people say a lot of things. The chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, Andy Harris, said late Tuesday he wasn't happy with the Senate bill. Again, this is a person who thinks it isn't cruel enough. House Republican Keith Self, I believe he's from Texas, and Martin Stutzman both say they don't like the bill at all, but they're going to vote for it. Otherwise, Donald Trump will threaten to kill them. Seriously. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat, called the bill a disgusting abomination and said he would pull out every procedural trick to stop it from ever passing. Jeffries made the statement standing in front of a sign warning that this bill will kill an additional 51,000 Americans each year. Meanwhile, Jeffries, who represents parts of New York City, was asked if he's going to give an official endorsement to Zohran Mamdani, who officially became the Democratic candidate for mayor of New York on Tuesday. After all the votes in last Tuesday's primary were finally tallied, he ended up with 56% of the vote. Well, Hakeem Jeffries said before making an endorsement, he's meeting with Mamdani, a Muslim, to discuss Mamdani's previous statements about Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. New York City has the largest population of Jews in the world. Mamdani became a United States citizen roughly 7 years ago, and on Tuesday, Donald Trump said he's looking into reports that Mamdani might have terrorist sympathies. Trump said he would consider revoking Mamdani's citizenship and then deporting him. Trump said, quote, "A lot of people are saying he's here illegally. We're going to look at everything," unquote. When asked about Mamdani's promise not to cooperate with ICE, Trump said, "Well, then we'll have to arrest him." Trump, a convicted felon, who was also found civilly liable for rape in common law parlance, made the comments while touring Florida's new Alligator Alcatraz, a migrant detention facility in the Everglades that will be able to contain 5,000 people, with alligators supposedly serving as the natural barrier to their trying to escape. I would just assume other Floridians would serve as the natural barrier. Members of the Seminole and Muscogee tribes, along with several environmental groups, protested Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' decision to build the detention center on land specifically designated for indigenous tribes and endangered species. Well, during that tour, Trump also called Mamdani, the New York City Democratic nominee for mayor, Trump also called Mamdani a communist. Trump said, "We don't need a communist in this country, but if we have one, I'm going to be watching over him very carefully on behalf of the nation." Senate Democrat from New York, Kirsten Gillibrand, apologized to Mamdani on Tuesday for comments she made last week during a radio interview, comments perceived by many as Islamophobic. During a radio interview airing locally in New York City, Senator Gillibrand accused Mamdani of, quote, supporting global jihad, as well as globalizing the Intifada. This was a Democrat who said this. She apologized on Tuesday. Al Jazeera reporting that on Tuesday, Israeli soldiers killed at least 109 Palestinians in Gaza. 28 were shot waiting for food at a humanitarian aid site. On Monday, Al Jazeera reports that 85 Palestinians killed in Gaza after Israel launched dozens of airstrikes from land and sea. 30 Palestinians killed when an Israeli missile strike hit a seaside Gaza cafe along the Mediterranean. A total of 85 Palestinians were killed on Monday. This is the Mop Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you so much for finding me. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. Leave a comment. If I get something wrong, I issue corrections. And please share this episode with your friends, please. One big beautiful bill, the single largest attack on America's social safety net, throwing more than 15 million Americans off Medicaid, 3 million off food stamps, makes its way to the House of Representatives on Wednesday. It is one of the least popular pieces of legislation in modern American history. CNN reporting a new Washington Post poll just out, giving the bill a 19-point approval rating. A new Fox poll says only 21% of Americans like this bill. As the Senate bill began to pass, Maine Senator Angus King, he's an independent who caucuses with Democrats, was caught on mic storming out of the Senate, shouting, "Shame on you guys. That was the most disgusting vote I've ever seen in my life." Alaska Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski voted for it after receiving several carve-outs for her Alaskan constituents when it comes to Medicaid and food stamps cuts. But after it passed in the Senate, after she voted for it, She said, well, it still needs work, and I hope the House doesn't see it as a final product. Well, Lisa, all you had to do was vote no, and it would have been defeated, and you could have done the work in the Senate. But she wouldn't do it. Murkowski has openly admitted she's terrified of Trump, physically terrified of Donald Trump. Russell Vought, Donald Trump's Office of Management and Budget Director, he's also one of the key authors of Project 2025. He says the Senate version of the budget bill passed on Tuesday is perfect, and he urged House Republicans to approve it as is. I will have more on what's in this budget bill momentarily, but first, let's turn to my friend Herschel.
Welcome back to the 50 Banana Question. Now, for our next contestant.
Thank you. Thank you, Herschel. That is artificial intelligence. Literally took me 3 minutes to make that. So I got a lot of complaints from listeners, and especially viewers of my YouTube channel, for the last show I did where I presented a photograph of newlyweds and Madame Tussauds Wax Museum dummies, Jeff Bezos and Laura Sanchez, swapping spit. I mean, I took a picture, and I want to apologize for this. I ran it through an artificial intelligence program to animate the kiss, and it was highly inappropriate, disrespectful to this kind couple. I apologize to Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez. I will never do it again. Let me show you what I'll never do again. This is just... I'm using artificial intelligence for bad instead of for good. And I'm sorry for this. And I will never do it again until later in the show. Variety reporting Paramount, CBS News' parent company, is nearing a settlement with Donald Trump, who sued the company for $20 billion, claiming its top-rated program, 60 Minutes, distorted the news, engaged in election interference and false advertising when it selectively edited an interview with Vice President Kamala Harris to make her look smarter than she actually is during the lead up to last year's presidential election. No, Donald, she's just smart. They didn't selectively edit it. Variety reporting Paramount's most recent offer is to pay Trump $15 million to make this frivolous lawsuit go away. A company called Skydance, attempting to purchase Paramount, reportedly wants this Trump lawsuit to go away so they can finalize the purchase, all as the FCC, under the leadership of Brendan Carr, another Project 2025 author. Brendan Carr is placing not-so-subtle regulatory pressure on this proposed deal. At one time, he demanded and gained access to the raw transcripts of 60 Minutes' interview with Kamala Harris and accused, as the chairman of the FCC and Trump's flunky, accused 60 Minutes of distorting the news. Last week, the Wall Street Journal reported a mediator suggested, and I'm not making this up, that CBS News should pay Trump $20 million, $3 million to cover his legal expenses, and $17 million to Trump's foundation over that 60 Minutes interview. That's what a mediator suggested, a former judge. If CBS cuts Trump that check to settle this frivolous lawsuit, the same way Disney cut Trump a check for $15 million after Trump sued ABC News for reporting a jury found him civilly liable for rape instead of sexual assault. We've been over this, right? So if CBS now cuts him a check, this will invite Donald Trump to file more and more frivolous lawsuits against other newsrooms in a flagrant attempt to bank millions of dollars while chilling freedom of speech. Every check these corporations cut to him incentivizes Donald Trump to sue every American news organization, some into bankruptcy. That's what right-wing techno-fascist Peter Thiel, seen here with fellow PayPal co-founder Elon Musk, it's what Peter Thiel did when he financed Hulk Hogan's defamation lawsuit against the news site Gawker. The $31 million settlement Gawker lost. They settled for $31 million, and Gawker went out of business. In the past 2 years, Donald Trump and his affiliated corporations have filed 20 lawsuits against news organizations and journalists, including Bob Woodward, CNN, Simon & Schuster, Forbes magazine, The Guardian, Reuters, Axios, and MSNBC. Now, these companies will be okay because they have pockets deep enough for high-powered attorneys. But he's also going after smaller news organizations, hoping to do to them what Peter Thiel did to Gawker. Trump's first instinct is to sue, and he does. He sues all the time. Yet it's the right wing, it's the Republicans who accuse Joe Biden of weaponizing the courts over something as insignificant as leading an insurrection against the government of the United States. I mean, it's such a slippery slope. I mean, first we prosecute Trump for leading an insurrection. Where does it end? I mean, we're going to have to then prosecute every president who orders thousands of his armed followers to break into the Capitol and overturn an election. It won't end. That's what Biden did by weaponizing the Justice Department. To mock Trump's litigious nature, California Governor Gavin Newsom just filed a $787 million defamation lawsuit against Fox News, claiming Jesse Waters lied about a phone call that never took place between Newsom and Trump. Newsom chose the figure $787 million because that's the exact amount Fox News paid to settle a lawsuit filed by Dominion, charging Fox News systematically defamed the voting machine corporation by giving voice to false claims that Dominion switched votes from Trump to Biden in the 2020 presidential election. Donald Trump's lawyers just filed a motion to drop his civil lawsuit against the Des Moines Register and their pollster, Ann Selzer. Trump originally accused them of election interference and violating Iowa's Consumer Fraud Act after the newspaper in the weekend before Election Day published the well-respected Selzer's poll showing Kamala Harris winning in Iowa. There's the headline from the Des Moines Register. The weekend before Election Day, Harris now leads Trump. Although Trump ended up winning the state of Iowa, and after the lawsuit got fired, Ann Selzer closed down her entire polling operation. Trump filed the lawsuit in federal court, then tried to move it into the Iowa State Court, but the federal court denied that motion. Trump's lawyers, however, decided on Monday to drop the suit inside the federal court, and despite being told they can't refile the lawsuit in Iowa's state court, they refiled it anyway in an attempt to get the lawsuit filed before Iowa's new anti-SLAPP law goes into effect, which punishes people like Donald Trump who are in the habit of filing frivolous lawsuits. I know this is a little deep in the woods, but the fact that they filed it like days before Iowa's anti-SLAPP law goes into effect, proves that the lawyers know they're filing frivolous lawsuits. The Des Moines Register is also facing a $3 million class action lawsuit filed by someone claiming to be a subscriber who insists Ann Selzer's poll showing Trump losing Iowa, it's a class action suit claiming faulty product being sold to consumers by the Des Moines Register. So, this is interesting, and I'm going to talk about this class action lawsuit filed against the Des Moines Register. So pay attention, because this is how Republicans are and have been weaponizing the courts since Clinton was president. The Neiman Lab reports that the class action lawsuit filed against the Des Moines Register is being financed by the Center for American Rights. That is a conservative, nonprofit, public interest law firm that purports to defend the First Amendment. You know, the First Amendment, your right to say the N or the C word and not get fired. That's how conservatives view freedom of speech. So this class action suit is being paid for by conservative donors to put the Des Moines Register out of business. I checked the Center for American Rights. It's a nonprofit. I checked its 501c3 filings, and they don't list their donors. But this is dark money. But according to Influence Watch, a lot of their money comes from right-wing philanthropies like the Sarah Scaife Foundation, named after an heir to the industrialist Andrew Mellon. You might remember Sarah Scaife. She passed away. Her son, Richard Mellon Scaife, also passed away at the age of 82 back in 2014, but their money lives on. According to Richard Mellon Scaife's obituary back in 2014, the Washington Post says he was worth, when he died, $1.4 billion inherited dollars, and he dedicated hundreds of millions of inherited dollars to combating what he called the liberal slant in American media that hates the free market. The guy who inherited $1.4 billion is a real beneficiary of the free market. He financed the Arkansas Project during the Clinton administration in order to dig up dirt on Whitewater. And he also financed Paula Jones's civil lawsuit against President Bill Clinton, which turned into a sting operation resulting in Bill Clinton's impeachment when lawyers for Paula Jones tricked Clinton into lying under oath about Monica Lewinsky. It was a sting operation. By the way, an illegal sting operation. This is the money in politics we rarely talk about. You know, we talk about Citizens United and how dark money can donate to super PACs. Well, there's this other dark money that we don't know about. Richard Scaife donated millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to right-wing media like the American Spectator, which published countless reports about this so-called murder of Vince Foster. And what Richard Mellon Scaife did is he paid phony journalists to lay the groundwork for people to believe Hillary Clinton was corrupt. Read Blinded by the Right by David Brock. He used to be working for Richard Mellon Scaife, and he wrote the articles for the American Spectator. Lies about Hillary and Bill, lies about Anita Hill, and David Brock saw the light, and he runs American Bridge now and Media Matters, which Trump is now trying to sue into bankruptcy. David Brock, Blinded by the Right. It's a great book. He wrote it, I think, in 2003. Pick it up. So he apologized to Hillary and David Brock and ended up creating super PACs that call out the lies spread by the Republicans. So Hillary Clinton, look, she might be a war hawk. Libya, she's got sharp elbows that sunk Bernie in 2016. She might have taken her unfair share of money from Wall Street to finance her campaigns, but she wasn't corrupt. She wasn't corrupt. She wasn't dishonest. And despite her flaws, she would have been one of the greatest presidents we ever had. And there'd be a 6-3 liberal majority on the Supreme Court right now. Be a completely different country had she been elected in 2016. Yes, she played hardball in 2016 with Bernie. Yes, I know. But she was unfairly tarnished by this vast right-wing conspiracy that people laughed at her when she went on the Today Show. Well, she was First Lady and said there's a vast right-wing conspiracy out to get us. And everybody, oh, you're paranoid. Turns out there is a vast right-wing conspiracy. Seriously. And this is what happens when oligarchs like Richard Mellon Scaife or Rupert Murdoch or the Koch brothers pump millions of dollars into websites and magazines posing as legitimate news organizations. What they do is they create an entire body of work with hyperlinks on the internet pointing to non-existent evidence of corruption that has the verisimilitude of truth. It looks real to people who lack critical thinking, who don't know that this is propaganda funded by billionaires. It's not news. It's propaganda. So it's not just Trump. It's not just Peter Thiel. What we have, and we've had this since 1992 and before, since the Powell letter, what we have right now are billionaires handing over dark money to finance lawyers trying to sue legitimate news organizations, to sue them out of business because those legitimate news organizations report the truth about corruption, the truth about income inequality. At the same time, these same billionaires finance their own network of right-wing news organizations and radio stations that lie about street crime. The billionaires finance news organizations, AM talk radio, websites, think tanks, and they try, what they want from their money is propaganda to convince ordinary Americans, low information Americans, that the rich are loyal patriots and the real criminals are on the streets. And we got to support the local police, not the FBI, not those police, not the Justice Department, not the criminal division of the Justice Department, not the police who work for the FTC, or those police, bad police, because they arrest rich white people. Now, your job, when you take money from the oligarchs, is to spread the lie that the streets are dangerous and we have to militarize the police. It's dangerous to go outside, even though crime has seen a nearly 40-year secular decline, with an occasional uptick when Trump was president. Well, in Pennsylvania on Monday, Trump's lawyers lost a motion to dismiss a federal civil suit filed by 5 men once known as the Central Park Five, who are now suing Trump for, once again, defaming them. This time, he defamed them during last year's presidential campaign when he continually repeated a lie that they were guilty of raping and murdering a female jogging through Central Park back in the 1980s. He said they murdered her. Somebody should tell her that because she's still alive. At the time of that assault, it was back in, I believe, 1989, Trump took out several full-page ads in newspapers here in New York City calling on the state of New York to restore capital punishment in order to execute these 5 black teenagers who ended up going to prison, some for 6, others for 13 years. They ended up serving time before they were released after exculpatory DNA evidence cleared them of any wrongdoing. They later settled with the city of New York for close to $50 million. In 2023, Yusef Salaam, one of the Central Park Five, was elected to the New York City Council. Sound effect there. I hate New York City. I hate everybody who lives here. This is why one of the many reasons I love New York City. Unfortunately, there are way more reasons to hate it, but luckily I hate myself more than I hate New York City, and I need something to blame, so I stay. So, the Central Park Five. When asked last year if he wanted to apologize for his calls to execute the Central Park Five, now known as the Exonerated Five, Trump said, no, I don't need to apologize because he said last year the 5 men confessed to killing the female jogger. Again, somebody should tell the jogger because she's still alive. And you don't want to turn Donald Trump into a liar. So not a good idea. So somebody should tell that jogger. So here is where conservatives funding the Paula Jones civil lawsuit against Bill Clinton ends up biting the right wing in their big, fat, cheesy ass. Okay. Paula Jones, some of you might remember, sued then President Bill Clinton for sexual harassment, claiming that while he was governor of Arkansas, he brought her up to a hotel room and he harassed her. He probably did. It's hard to defend that behavior. He probably did. The Supreme Court ruled in 1982 that a president can be sued in civil court while he is president for anything he did before becoming president. I'm sorry. No, I got that wrong. They ruled that an ex-president can be sued for anything he did while he was president. They can sue. No, hang on. How does it work? It was Fitzgerald versus Nixon, and they said you cannot sue a president in civil court after he leaves office for anything he did while president performing official acts. But in 1982, they said you can sue an ex-president for the Justice Department can file criminal charges against an ex-president for any crimes he committed as president. That's what Fitzgerald versus Nixon, I think it was the Burger Court in 82, ruled that. Okay. During the Clinton presidency, Paula Jones brought a civil sexual harassment suit to then President of the United States, Bill Clinton, and it went to the Supreme Court. And the court ruled that while presidents are busy, they still have time to be deposed in a civil lawsuit if that civil lawsuit was filed over something the president did before they became president. Am I making sense? Leave a comment. So Clinton as president, because of the Supreme Court ruling, Clinton versus Paula Jones or Paula Jones versus Clinton, the Supreme Court ruled that Bill Clinton, a sitting president, could be sued by Paula Jones for sexual harassment because the sexual harassment took place before he was president. So he was deposed while he was president. Can you follow this? I hope you can follow this. I hope I'm being clear here. So while this was going on, this is the vast right-wing conspiracy that I'm talking about. It's not paranoia. This is true. So while the Paula Jones civil lawsuit is going on, Ken Starr was the independent counsel who was supposed to look into Whitewater, couldn't find anything, and he turned it into an open-ended assignment to find any dirt he could on Bill Clinton. He spent, $40 million looking into Bill Clinton, could not find anything. Wherever he looked, Ken Starr came up empty. But then Starr discovered, through Linda Tripp, a friend of Monica Lewinsky, through Linda Tripp and through Linda Tripp's connections to the vast right-wing conspiracy, Starr learned from Linda Tripp that Clinton was having relations with Monica Lewinsky. So, through back-channel communications, which Ken Starr later admitted was probably illegal. Of course it's illegal. The independent counsel, Ken Starr, got Paula Jones's lawyers, who were about to depose Bill Clinton in the President Bill Clinton, they're about to depose him in the sexual harassment civil suit. Ken Starr got her lawyers to trick Clinton into lying under oath about his relationship with Monica Lewinsky. It was a sting operation. The right-wing billionaires financed Paula Jones' sexual harassment lawsuit against Clinton. President Clinton then had to testify. Ken Starr, also part of this vast right-wing conspiracy, ties to Richard Mellon Scaife. Look up Richard Mellon Scaife, Pepperdine, how they try to hire Ken Starr using Richard Mellon Scaife's money, and then it got exposed, so Ken Starr said, maybe I'm not going to be the president of Pepperdine just quite yet, okay? So Ken Starr, at the time, the independent prosecutor, couldn't find a crime, decided his only hope in destroying Bill Clinton was to trick him into committing a crime. You didn't commit. I can't prove you committed a crime. I'm going to have to make you commit one. Perjury. Starr knew Clinton had to testify under oath about sexually harassing Paula Jones. Through back channels, illegal back channels, Ken Starr got Paula Jones's attorneys to ask Clinton about Monica Lewinsky, knowing Clinton would lie, which he did, and poof, Now he's committed a crime. Not a big enough crime to prosecute, but enough to get him impeached. And you know who the House manager was? Lindsey Graham. Go back on YouTube. Look at Lindsey Graham, weepy-eyed. The president lied about heterosexual sex. So, this is why these machinations have now bit the right wing in the ass. They financed Paula Jones. They got the Supreme Court to say a sitting president can be deposed and sued in a civil court while he's president. Now, unless this Supreme Court overturns Clinton v. Jones, Donald Trump will have to testify as president in this lawsuit filed by the Central Park Five. Why? Because dumbass defamed them, allegedly, last year when dumbass wasn't president. Last year when dumbass lied once again and falsely claimed that the Central Park Five confessed to murdering the Central Park jogger. So thanks to the billionaires who financed Paula Jones's lawsuit against Bill Clinton, Trump can now be sued in civil court while he is president. And this isn't about parsing official acts from unofficial acts as president. He wasn't president last year. And he can be sued for everything he did between January 21st, 2021 and January 20th, 2025, the 4 years he wasn't president. Where are the civil lawsuits against him? You're going to tell me there aren't people who can sue him for damages for what he did during the past 4 years before he became president again? Look, we're just halfway into Trump's first year. It feels like he's served longer than Roosevelt. We're just halfway into Trump's first year back in office. A lot can happen between now and when he decides to run again, which he most certainly will try to do. I know everybody's tired. I know that. We're coming up on the holidays. It's summer. I know. And I know you don't want to hear this. But everything, and I do mean everything, comes down to next year's midterms. When I say that, people fire back, wait. Everything came down to last year's elections. Well, look what's going on right now. Everything did come down to last year's election. Everything we had been warned about came to fruition. Nobody was lying when Bill Clinton, Kamala Harris said, our country is on the line. It's true. It was true. And this next election, everything comes down to it. We have to rid our nation of this cancer. The courts are not going to save us. I'm sorry to tell you this. The only people who can save our country, the Democrats. And it's not just Bernie and AOC. We don't have enough Bernies and AOCs in the Democratic Party. Schumer, Jeffries, we need to win either the Senate or the House, just one of those chambers, preferably both. That's, if we can just get the House or the Senate, Trump can't run for re-election. That I promise you. Trump will not be able to run again if either the House or the Senate flips. The problem is Trump and the entire Republican Party's tenuous relationship to the truth serves them quite well in electoral politics here in America, where millions lack the critical thinking to keep them from believing everything these serial prevaricators spew out of their mouth. Let's call it a mouth. Trump calls himself the law and order president, despite being a convicted felon, a man forbidden from running a charity in New York State, the same New York State that just fined him $500 million for defrauding lenders, a state where a jury found him civilly liable for rape in the common law parlance. A man, according to the Washington Post fact checker, who told close to 50,000 lies during his first term as president, and yet has now created a cottage industry suing what he calls the fake news for reporting the truth about him. So it's no surprise that as the House once again takes up his signature piece of legislation, one big beautiful bill, which passed the Senate on Tuesday, I'm talking about the budget for 2026 to fund his agenda of wickedness. No surprise that in order to sell this to the American people, in order to sell one big, beautiful bill to the American people, he holds up this fetid bag of worm-infested bat guano and tries to convince the American people it's porterhouse steak. He's going to lie, not going to. Everything he says about one big, beautiful bill is a lie. Trump now warning Americans that if one big, beautiful bill doesn't pass, his 2017 tax cuts for the richest 1% won't become permanent, and he says all Americans will end up paying 67% more to the IRS each year. It's a lie. The Washington Post says, should the bill fail and the 2017 Trump tax cuts expire at the end of the year, Americans on average would face a 7.5% increase in taxes. Trump claiming the new bill eliminates all taxes on Social Security. The Washington Post reporting this too is a lie. His bill only allows seniors in lower tax brackets to receive roughly $4,000 tax-free dollars in Social Security payments each year. Trump also insisting the budget doesn't touch Medicaid. A massive $1 trillion lie. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the budget bill passed in the Senate Tuesday cuts Medicaid by, I have it here, 18%. Is that correct? 18%, and it will throw 12 million Americans off Medicaid, and an additional 5 million off Obamacare, meaning roughly 17.5 million Americans won't have health care. So 71 million low-income Americans, many of them children or people with disabilities, rely on Medicaid. 71 million. I think that's 1 out of 5. Many of them don't even know they're on Medicaid because Medicaid is administered by the states who don't call it Medicaid, even though it is. So for my foreign listeners, Medicare, Lyndon Johnson gave us Medicare. I think it passed in 64, 65. That is for grandma and grandpa over the age of 65. It's administered by our federal government. And Americans love Medicare. which is why Medicare has been called the third rail of politics. You cannot touch it. Plus, old people vote. So nobody's touching Medicare. Then there's Medicaid, which Johnson passed after Medicare, and that is for Americans living at or below the poverty line. People who rely on Medicaid, people living at or below the poverty line, are more likely to vote for Democrats and are less likely to vote at all. So killing Medicaid is in the Republican Party's best interest. Not Medicare. Old people vote, so you can't touch Medicare. Medicaid, those are Democratic voters, and the studies show the poorer you are, the harder it is for you to vote. This is voter suppression. It is voter suppression. So here's my promise to you. I know sometimes I get boring and I get deep into the... Here's my promise to you. If you stay with me, I promise you, give me about 15 minutes, you will know the difference between Medicaid and I promise you. You'll know the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. You'll know how Medicaid is administered in America, and you'll understand how venal the Republican Party truly is, how they're really killing poor people. I mean, I'm not going to mince words here. So if you stay with me, and I know this is not easy to understand, but I promise you, if you stick with me, you'll understand what Republicans are doing to Medicaid and what they're lying to the American people about, okay? So Medicaid. Johnson gave us Medicaid in the 60s. It was established right after Medicare, and because Republicans complained that government was getting too big because of Medicare, a compromise was struck where they agreed Medicaid would be administered by the states. So Washington would appear less imposing, even though Washington was paying for practically all of Medicaid. Medicare, for grandma, that's administered by the federal government. Medicaid is administered by the states. They get what are called block grants from the federal government. Okay? Each individual state uses federal dollars, those block grants, to provide health care for Americans who are living at or below the poverty line. And like I just said, the states rebrand Medicaid. They don't call it Medicaid. Each state gives it a different name. In California, it's Medi-Cal. So my sister told me, and she said, most Americans don't know they're on Medicaid. And I agreed with her. If you're relying on Medicaid, you might mistakenly believe it's your state government providing your medical care, when in fact, it's the evil, brutish federal government paying for practically all of it. Right now, a lot of low information Trump voters, as though there's any other kind, they're thinking Trump's doing a good job throwing millions off Medicaid. That's what they're thinking, completely unaware that they themselves are on Medicaid and could end up getting thrown off of it pretty soon. But after the midterms, Republicans are very cagey. They strategically time these cuts for after the midterms. This budget is being called the largest cut in U.S. history to America's social safety net. It's true. There's never been anything like this before. At the same time, this budget provides $4.5 trillion in tax cuts for the richest 1%. Again, $4.5 trillion tax cut for the richest 1%, and they try to pay for it by slashing spending on Medicaid and, of course, food stamps, and that comes to about total of $1.5 trillion. We'll do the math, right? A $4.5 trillion tax cut, but you're only cutting $1.5 trillion in spending. Actually, they're adding about $1.2 trillion in spending. The Congressional Budget Office says this budget bill will add roughly $3.5 trillion to our national debt over the next decade. Republicans passed it in the Senate Tuesday through a process called reconciliation. That's a parliamentary rule in the Senate that inoculates spending bills from a filibuster. A filibuster is you need 60 votes to overcome a filibuster. But some bills are thumbs up or thumbs down, simple majority. And the budget bill, according to Senate rules, can be passed through reconciliation and be filibuster proof. But the spending bill cannot add to our nation's long-term debt. Otherwise, it can't be passed through reconciliation and must be passed, it can be filibustered. So what did the Republicans do? They do what they always do. They lie. In order to pass this bill through reconciliation, in order to pass a budget that adds trillions to our debt, which that debt automatically disqualifies this bill from the reconciliation process, Senate Republicans decided to lie. And it wasn't just an ordinary run-of-the-mill Republican lie. David Dayen over at the American Prospect writes about this. Everybody should read David Dayen. They voted to lie. Before the Senate passed the budget bill on Tuesday, they took a vote to lie and say this budget, a budget that calls for the debt ceiling to be lifted by $5 trillion, they voted to lie and say this budget doesn't add to the national debt, even though written into the bill is permission for the Department of the Treasury to issue an additional $5 trillion in government securities to finance the budget, because it adds at least $3.5 trillion to the debt. So they want wiggle room. We better raise it, make it $5 trillion. So there's lying and then there's lying. And the entire Republican-controlled Senate voted to lie, to put into writing that this bill won't add to the debt. Therefore, it's filibuster-proof and can pass through reconciliation with a simple majority. It's unbelievable. The bill that calls for increasing the debt ceiling by $5 trillion, according to Senate Republicans, does not increase our national debt. Now, Republicans insist they're not lying. Instead, they're calling it an accounting trick devised by Chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, Lindsey Graham, who came up with a way to move numbers around to trick the Senate parliamentarian by claiming the budget bill This budget bill, the 2026 budget bill, is not giving the richest 1% a $4.5 trillion tax cut. No, it's not. It's the 2017 budget bill that's giving the richest 1% a $4.5 trillion tax cut. We're simply extending those 2017 tax cuts. Republicans are lying. They're saying, no, it's this bill. It's not this bill that's adding $3.5 trillion to the debt. It's the 2017 tax cuts that are adding more to the debt. This budget bill has nothing to do with raising the debt. We're just renewing the 2017 tax cuts. Not happening on our watch. Not raising the debt. Oh, and by the way, we need to extend the debt ceiling by $5 trillion. Lindsay's lie, his accounting trick, passed in the Senate 53 to 47, and then that was a procedural hurdle, and then they went to vote on the bill, and it passed based on one of 8 trillion lies. But that was Lindsay's big lie. Lindsey Graham is a pretty good liar. In fact, his voters back in South Carolina still think he just can't seem to find the right girl. So that little $3.5 trillion accounting trick now gives Trump's press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, just enough permission to publicly declare this new budget reins in spending and forces Congress to get its fiscal house in order. You know, the way Trump has spent his entire life living within his means, never racking up debt, never declaring bankruptcy. So, look, I'm following this. They're not going to exhaust me. I know this is exhausting. They're not going to exhaust me. I'm following this. They're not going to wear me down. I'm going to wear them down. I know it's exhausting trying to keep track of this because none of us, if the system were working, we wouldn't be paying attention to this. But it's not working, and that's why they're able to go in there and do this because we never had to pay attention to this before. The new bill, but we should be. The new bill passed in the Senate. It goes back to the House now. It cuts food stamps by 15%. Who would cut food stamps? Who would cut Medicaid? The Congressional Budget Office predicts this will throw millions of Americans off food stamps. Who would do this? How bad is your penis working that you have to do this? It also mandates able-bodied adults with teenage children. They must now show proof they worked 80 hours a month in order to qualify for food stamps. Or they have to go to school for 80 hours a month, or they have to do volunteer work for 80 hours a month. So, I've been over this, but work requirements. Work requirements, it's a lot of work. It means states have to police food stamp recipients. And that is way more expensive than just saying, who gives an F? It's food. Give them the food. It's in the who says to anybody you can't have food? And by the way, study after study shows it's way cheaper to trust the American people than it is to hire more employees, mostly private consulting firms, which is why Republicans like the work requirement idea. They hire they privatize this. They hire consultants to administer the paperwork, making sure people at or below the poverty line aren't gaming the system. This is how they transfer money earmarked for food stamps to private consulting firms who charge 10 times as much for 1,000 times worse results. They say we're tackling food stamp fraud. Listen to me. Food stamp fraud, like voter fraud, doesn't exist. And even if it did exist, who cares? Voter fraud, if it existed, I would be concerned about. Food stamp, who cares but it doesn't exist. Food stamp fraud doesn't exist. Now listen to me. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, which administers food stamps, says intentional food stamp fraud, that would be selling food stamps or applying for food stamps despite having an income high enough that disqualifies you from being eligible for food stamps. Actual food stamp fraud is somewhere in the neighborhood of 0.02%. 0.02% of all food stamp spending goes to people committing intentional food stamp fraud. By the way, I shouldn't smile because people are suffering, but what are we talking about here? On average, $6 a day. That's what the average food stamp recipient receives. $6 a day. Food stamps cost the United States government $110 billion a year. We spend $110 billion a year on food stamps. We should be spending $2 trillion a year feeding everyone in this country and around the world. The Department of Agriculture says of that $110 billion we spend on food stamps, 0.02% is fraud. I hate to ask you to do the math, but I'm building to a larger point. 0.2% of food stamp spending comes to $220 million. That's what they're going to save by throwing people off food stamps and cracking down with work requirements. They're going to save $220 million a year. So, how does that work? Well, the states are going to have to hire private consulting firms to pay them way more than $220 million to root out fraud, making life even more miserable for poor people. You're going to have consultants cracking down on non-existent food stamp fraud. Republicans who say government is the problem, it's so inefficient, they are going to now spend probably $1 billion of our tax dollars to save $220 million. They're going to hire all their friends. I don't know who maybe Deloitte. I don't know. I don't want to. There's outside contractors. This big money in cracking down on food stamps. we already know from work requirements in Iowa and Georgia that it costs way more to police food stamps than it does, costs way more to police food stamps than to just let 0.02% of food stamp recipients live large, game the system by getting $7 a day in food stamps when they should only be getting $6. It's cheap. Turns out it's cheaper to let them have an extra $1 a day of food stamps. Okay, keep this in mind. They're going to spend $1 billion. They're going to give consultants $1 billion to save $220 million on food stamp fraud, okay? $220 million that they want to save, okay? That's in the budget. You know what else is in the budget? $300 million, okay? $220 million to crack. They're going to spend $1 billion to save $220 million that they lose in food stamp fraud. $300 million they're going to spend to reimburse local police departments for the added protection they provide in cities where Donald Trump owns property and likes to visit. Meanwhile, at least 14 American cities still haven't been reimbursed by the Trump campaign for the $2 million these towns spent providing additional public safety during Trump's campaign rallies. The Trump campaign still hasn't reimbursed El Paso, Minneapolis, Erie, a couple of cities in Arizona. Doesn't pay his bills. Can't reimburse you for protecting me when I use that money for Melania's stylist and my lawyers. $300 million tax dollars to reimburse local police for protecting Trump when he visits Mar-a-Lago or Bedminster. But he's going to throw off 3 million people from food stamps. He's going to throw 3 million people off food stamps to save $220 million. Why? As I came to realize on my last show, this is voter suppression. The poorer you are, the more likely you are to vote for a Democrat. But the hungrier you are, the less likely you are to vote at all. I'm going to get to Rick Scott in a second. These are really bad people. Really bad people. In calculating, let me just finish up here on food stamps. In calculating eligibility for food stamps, applicants will no longer be allowed to deduct the cost of their internet or fuel bills from their annual income. So, you want to lower your income when you apply for food stamps. So you deduct certain things to prove you need food stamps. Can't deduct heat or your internet. The budget bill lowers federal Medicaid reimbursement to hospital emergency rooms that treat undocumented immigrants. In most states, by law, emergency rooms must treat everyone regardless of immigration status. Well, the Republican budget is telling these states if an immigrant needs emergency care, we're now paying 10% less for immigrants. You'll notice when you go to a hospital now, they ask you for your immigration status if you're not in a sanctuary city. 10 states. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Medicaid expansion. I know this is, I know this is hard. I know it. I know. But I'm going to explain Medicaid expansion and how evil Rick Scott is, the senator from Florida. If you think you hate Rick Scott now, let me explain to you. I promise you'll understand what Medicaid expansion under Obamacare means. One of the things I try to do on this show is not talk in shorthand, because I know shorthand is really to disguise, I don't know what I'm talking about. So I have the luxury, this is a podcast, so I have the luxury to explain things to you. So I know Medicaid expansion is something that's tossed around by people who probably don't know what Medicaid expansion actually means. So I'm going to explain to you what Medicaid expansion is, and then you'll see how evil these Republicans are. 10 states still haven't taken advantage of Obamacare's Medicaid expansion. Okay, what is Medicaid expansion? Under Obamacare, the federal government expanded Medicaid payments to states that are willing to expand eligibility for Medicaid to Americans whose income is way above the poverty line, so they don't qualify for Medicaid, but they don't make enough to afford health insurance. There are a lot of people who are in that gray area where they make too much to qualify for Medicaid, but not enough to qualify to afford health insurance. So that's what Medicaid expansion is. If a state, 40 states have signed on to Medicaid expansion. If a state accepts Medicaid expansion, if they raise the income eligibility for Medicaid, the federal government reimburses, will expand the block grants that it gives to those states. Right? So let's say in order to qualify for Medicaid, you make $5 a year or below. Let's say the poverty line is $5 a year or below. Well, if you make $5 or below, then you qualify for Medicaid. What happens if you make $6 a year? You don't qualify for Medicaid, but you can't afford health insurance. So if a state expands the eligibility, if they raise the poverty line to like $8 a year, the federal government will reimburse any state that raises the poverty line to make more people eligible for Medicaid. And that is what Medicaid expansion is. It's not Medicare for all, but it was the best Obama can do. I remember him trying to pass Obamacare. Look at what we're up against. So I'm not going to defend Obamacare, but the Republicans have been trying to kill it. So that's what Medicaid expansion is. And I know I just explained it to you. And I know I explained it properly. So now you know what Medicaid expansion is. Again, a lot of Americans don't qualify for Medicaid because they're not close enough to the poverty line and they don't earn enough to be able to afford health insurance. So Obamacare, evil Obamacare, expands Medicaid eligibility to people who are living further away, who are above the poverty line, makes Medicaid available to what is called our working poor. who earn too much to qualify for Medicaid but can't afford health insurance. There are people watching me in Canada, Europe, who are going, what is wrong with this country? What is wrong with you people that you would do this? What is wrong with you people that you would allow them to do this to you? 40 states have signed on to Obamacare's Medicaid expansion. It's free. The federal government pays for all of it. But 10 states still refuse to expand eligibility for Medicaid. 10 states still reject Medicaid expansion, leaving a total of 3 million of their citizens who live in those 10 states. 3 million can't afford health care. They make too much for Medicaid, but they don't make enough to be able to afford health insurance. That's what these states are doing to their own. They're doing it on principle because they believe Medicaid expansion is federal overreach. 10 states have refused to take the federal money for Medicaid expansion because they rather have their own citizens die than admit Barack Obama was right. All but one of those 10 states controlled by Republicans. Obviously, they are. Now, I'm going to read off the names of these states, and you tell me how much better this country would be without these states. I'm going to read off these states, the check their cancer rates, their infant mortality rates, their gun death rates, their traffic accident rates, their test scores, their life expectancies. These are the 10. There's only one state here that we need. Alabama won't accept Medicaid expansion. Florida, Georgia, Kansas, Mississippi, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Wyoming. How much better would this country be without those 9 states that bring 18 senators to Washington? 18 senators. Those 9 states, I got more people living in my apartment building here in New York than those people have. Wisconsin is the 10th. It has a Democratic governor, and their Supreme Court is controlled by Democrats, but they still haven't done Medicaid expansion. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. So President Biden passed legislation. God, I miss him. I miss him. He surprised me. President Biden passed legislation that included an extra financial incentive for those 10 states to finally accept Medicaid expansion. They said, we're going to give you a little extra money if you accept Medicaid expansion. The House version of the bill stripped those incentives out of the new budget. Right now, the Senate version of the bill put those incentives back in. So it'd be interesting to see if the House takes them back out. So the Senate put the Medicaid expansion incentives into the budget bill over, control your rage, David, control your rage, over the protestations of this pig. And that's unfair to pigs. One of the worst people in the world, Florida Senator Republican Rick Scott. One of the worst people in the world, Rick Scott. Now remember, Florida won't accept Medicaid expansion. Rick Scott said, the only reason I'm voting to advance the bill, this is what he said on Saturday when they were doing the procedural vote. He said, the only reason I voted to advance the bill was I was promised the bill would strip out these incentives for states like Florida to expand Medicaid. That was his line in the sand. I won't vote for this budget unless you can promise me that people in my state will never qualify. I got to make sure we don't do Medicaid expansion. That's your line in the sand? You want to make sure that people are deprived of health care. Well, he didn't get that promise quite yet. But he did vote for the bill without Medicaid incentives. He voted for the bill with those Medicaid incentives still in there. But he was pissed. He was pissed off. Well, most of you know why I'm bringing this up. Most of you know Rick Scott used to be the CEO of a hospital. You're going to get, if you don't know this, if you're a new listener, your head's going to explode. Okay, Rick Scott, Florida senator, hates Medicaid. Used to be the CEO of a hospital chain called Columbia HCA Healthcare. Used to be the CEO. He was forced to quit after he agreed to pay the Justice Department $1.7 billion in fines to settle a federal lawsuit charging him and his company with defrauding Medicaid and Medicare. Now, this was back in 2007 when $1.7 billion was a lot of money. At the time, it was the single largest healthcare fraud settlement ever. Never went to trial because Rick Scott settled, and then he quit and said, I better go into politics. And he ran for governor of Florida and got himself elected. Like I said, how great would America be without Florida? So the healthcare company that Rick Scott ran paid $1.7 billion to settle the lawsuit. They wouldn't take it he didn't want it to go to trial because he was accused of billing fraud, paying kickbacks, bribing doctors and hospitals, making false diagnoses for illnesses, and then charging for non-existent treatments, and illegally billing sick people for services not provided. He's a good man. He's a very good man. Now, if somebody accused me or a company I'm running of doing that, I would say, take me to court. I'm innocent. Rick Scott said, how much to make this go away? $1.7 billion? Here's a check for $1.7 billion for this to go away. And then he went away. Should have gone away to prison. Should have gone away to prison. But he says the problem is street crime, non-existent street crime. We have to fund the police, right? Defund the Justice Department, defund the criminal division of the Justice Department, the Consumer Fraud Division, defund the FTC, defund the Antitrust Division. We need more police on the street to fight non-existent crime. This is the man fighting the budget bill because it still includes incentives for Medicaid expansion. He wants work requirements for Medicaid. Got to crack down on Medicaid fraud. He literally said that. We have to crack down on Medicaid fraud. Too many Americans are gaming the system. I'm not going anywhere. They're not going to wear me down. They're not. The House version of the budget attempted to strangle all the green energy initiatives introduced by Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, which, despite its flaws, was the single largest climate bill in world history. The House's version of the budget bill introduced excise taxes on wind and solar intended to punish alternative energy companies for saving the planet. The Senate version of the bill, passed on Tuesday, removed those taxes, those punitive taxes on alternative green energy. However, the Senate version of the bill kept one part of the House bill that goes after green energy. They kept the part of the House bill that eliminates tax incentives for people purchasing electric vehicles. For example, if you lease or purchase a Tesla, you could deduct $7,500 from your taxes. Gone from the House bill, gone from the Senate bill. So it's no surprise Elon Musk, whose mega fortune rests on the future of Tesla, he took to his money-losing Twitter and declaimed one big, beautiful bill is, quote, utterly destructive. Now it's destructive. He was fine with millions being left to starve. In fact, he said it didn't cut food stamps or Medicaid deep enough. But removing tax credits to buy a Tesla, utterly destructive. Musk is now saying one big beautiful bill will destroy millions of jobs in America and cause immense strategic harm to our country. He complained the bill gives handouts to industries of the past while severely damaging industries of the future, like, his, right? Donald Trump on Tuesday said, and I'm not making this up, that he might consider having Elon Musk deported. Trump said, quote, I don't know. We'll have to take a look. Trump warned that Musk's Department of Government Efficiency might turn into a monster that ends up eating all of Elon Musk's federal contracts. He added sarcastically, wouldn't that be terrible? It's so strange because usually people who work with Donald Trump always end up looking back at it as being such a positive experience. This is a first. I'm going to wrap it up. Anybody still here? I know this is dry, but I love this stuff. The new budget bill caves into demands from accountants by stripping the IRS direct file program of funding. This is something Biden introduced. It was something Senator Elizabeth Warren fought for. So, make it easier for Americans to pay their taxes. So they came up with IRS direct file. Needs little work, but it's pretty good. But they had to get rid of it because makes paying taxes free and uncomplicated. And so accountants, like oil companies, lobby to protect their industry. The new bill, this is kind of interesting. The new bill, and then I'll wrap it up. Oh, I need air conditioning. The new budget includes what are called Trump accounts for babies. Every newborn baby, this is if it passes. Let me know what you think of this in the comments section. And by the way, if I got anything wrong here, because there was the House bill, and then the Senate took it and rewrote it, and now it's going back to the House to be rewritten and then goes into a conference committee. So I think I did a pretty good job tracking the revisions, but if I got anything wrong, let me know in the comment section. And I think Trump accounts survived the Senate version of the bill. Trump accounts for babies. Every newborn baby born between January 1st, 2025 and December 31st, 2028 would receive $1,000 from the federal government. Is it a good idea? It's called the Trump account, though. As I understand it, parents can also toss $5,000 in each year. So right there, this benefits the rich. And it grows tax-free until the child, as an adult, begins taking the money out. Basically, it's for rich people to set up retirement accounts for their rich babies who are born retired because they're never going to have to work. That's basically what the Trump account is. If you have $5,000 to throw at your kid each year. So anyway, I understand the Senate version of the bill. The money parents would put into these accounts would be invested in an index fund that tracks the overall stock market. So the idea behind this was to create generational wealth and to shrink income inequality by giving, if every baby born in America is given $5,000 by the federal government, first of all, that could be a way to save Social Security, but it gives them equal footing so they can compete with rich kids, but they added in, but parents can throw in $5,000 a year. Well, there's your income inequality going out. There's more income inequality because the parents, well, you know what I'm saying. All right. I like this. The new bill taxes nonprofit charitable organizations that pay their executives more than $1 million a year. Yes, there are Franklin Graham. Billy Graham's son makes more than $1 million a year. Samaritan's Purse and the Billy Graham Evangelical Association. He makes more than $1 million a year doing the Lord's work. Well, this new bill taxes nonprofit charitable organizations that pay their executives more than $1 million a year. So right now, any nonprofit that pays Franklin Graham, for example, more than $1 million, they get hit with a 21% excise tax on everything in that salary over $1 million. And the Senate version of the new bill increases the percentage of that excise tax, and it's estimated it will bring in an additional $3.8 billion over the next decade. This will be especially painful for so-called nonprofit hospitals that pay their top employees several $1 million a year. You know, you run a nonprofit hospital, that's the biggest scam going. They all get they all get millions and millions of dollars, and we're a nonprofit. But tell me again how Medicare for All is inefficient. All right, I should save this for tomorrow. Where am I? Is anybody still here? Okay. $45 billion additional dollars would be spent on increasing the capacity of our for-profit immigration detention facilities. That means building more for-profit detention facilities, $45 billion going directly to CoreCivic and Geo Group, the two largest for-profit prison companies in America and two of the earliest contributors to Donald Trump's election campaign last year. CoreCivic stock is up 54% since Trump took office. Since he was elected. Again, Geo Group jumped 2.3% after the Senate passed the budget bill on Tuesday. Geo Group its stock is up 60% since Trump won in November. That's Tom Homan, our border czar, on the right. And guess where Tom Homan, our border czar, is going to end up working in a couple of years. It's either going to be Geo Group or CoreCivic. Both Joe Biden and Barack Obama signed executive orders phasing out for-profit federal prisons. One of Trump's very first orders in 2017 and again in 2025 was reversing those executive orders so he could hand CoreCivic and Geo Group millions and millions of dollars in contracts. Now it's going to be billions. 6.2 additional $1 billion for border surveillance technology. Palantir Technology is helping to build a national surveillance database for our government, a national surveillance database on all American citizens and non-citizens. In the past year, its stock climbed 405%. Why? Government contracts. Peter Thiel, who I mentioned earlier, the man who bankrolled Hulk Hogan's lawsuit that put Gawker out of business, he is the founder and chairman of Palantir. He's one of the techno-fascist ringleaders coming out of Silicon Valley. Tennessee Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn was able to remove provisions in the Senate bill that the House had put in, blocking states from being able to enforce their own laws regarding artificial intelligence. So this is good. It looks like, for the time being, states will be able to pass laws that rein in AI. Thank God, because it's a serious problem, AI. I mean, any idiot can use artificial intelligence to make it look like Jeff Bezos is eating gold coins. And we need laws to prevent this. Now, I'm only showing this to you to demonstrate how pernicious AI can be when left unchecked. I mean, AI, there is good, but some people can use it for bad. Like this. Some D-bag took a picture of two perfectly nice people, Jeff Bezos, Lauren Sanchez, two people in love who wouldn't hurt anyone, and this D-bag ran it through artificial intelligence and did this. I mean, we need laws to stop this. That's the cash register. That's what's playing in Lauren Sanchez's head as she kisses that homunculus. Someone else used AI to do this, to produce a photograph of Donald Trump picking his nose and then eating his boogers. I mean, we need laws to stop this artificial intelligence. Right, Herschel? Let's go to Herschel and then we'll wrap it up.
Welcome back to the 50 Banana Question. Now, for our next contestant.
Oh, thank you, Herschel. What's this? Okay. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Sorry I went long today. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. Please share it. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room. I think I did a pretty good job explaining some pretty Byzantine things. So I'm happy with this show. Thank you for listening. I'm going to try to do a show tomorrow or the next day. Leave a comment if I got anything wrong. And again, I want to apologize. I mean, that is just wrong. And I will never, ever show this again. Or this. I'm never going to show this again. And I'm never going to show this again. Never. Never going to show it again. All right. Bye.